Picture a locked wooden cabinet in a medieval European apothecary. Inside, next to jars of rare herbs and imported spices, sits a small, precious block of white crystal. A physician chips off a tiny piece, not for dessert, not for a treat, but as medicine. For most of human history, sugar wasn't something you sprinkled without thinking. It was rationed, locked away. So here's the question worth asking. How does something once rarer than gold end up in nearly everything we eat, without a second thought? This is the story of how sugar conquered the world, and what it cost to get there. Long before sugar was sweet on your tongue, it was just grass, growing in the humid lowlands, thousands of years before anyone thought to do anything more than chew its stalk for the juice inside. Nobody who first tasted that juice could have imagined what it would become. But somewhere along the way, someone figured out how to turn that juice into something that could be stored, traded, fought over. The breakthrough happened in India, sometime in the centuries before the Common Era. Farmers and chemists there did something nobody else had done. They figured out how to crystallize sugarcane juice into solid, storable crystals. Word of it traveled fast. Persian writers, encountering Indian sugar for the first time, described it in almost magical terms. A reed, they said, that produced honey without any bees at all. The language itself carried the discovery westward. Sanskrit words for sugar would go on to shape Persian vocabulary, then Arabic. But this sugar wasn't food in the way we think of it. It was rare, expensive, used more like a spice or a medicine than something you'd eat every day. And it was about to start a journey that would cross deserts, seas, and centuries. As Islamic civilization expanded, so did sugarcane. Persian and Arab agronomists carried the crop westward, refining irrigation systems and mill technology as they went. This is the phase where sugar stops being just a curiosity and starts becoming an industry. Growing cane at scale required organized labor, engineered water systems, specialized knowledge passed from region to region. Sugar was no longer just a product of nature. It was becoming a product of infrastructure, and that infrastructure was about to knock on Europe's door. By the time sugar arrived in medieval Europe, it had become something almost mythical. A luxury so rare that only kings, nobles, and the wealthiest merchants could afford it. Venice, sitting at the crossroads of Mediterranean trade, became Europe's sugar capital. At a royal banquet, an elaborate sugar sculpture might be presented purely to display wealth, an edible trophy, meant to be seen more than eaten. But there was a problem. European demand for sugar was growing far faster than the Mediterranean world could supply it. If you wanted more sugar, you needed more land, more cane, and, as history was about to show, you needed more hands to work it. Portugal found its answer in the Atlantic. On islands like Madeira and São Tomé, Portuguese colonizers built something new. Sugar plantations organized for maximum output, supported by Atlantic shipping routes, and worked, increasingly, by enslaved African labor. These islands were small, but what happened on them was not small at all. This was the prototype, the blueprint. Plantation organization, milling technology, forced labor, Atlantic trade routes, all of it tested here first. What began on these small islands was about to become one of the largest and most consequential systems in human history. By the 1500s and 1600s, sugar production exploded across the Atlantic world. Brazil became the largest sugar producer on Earth. The Caribbean, Barbados, Jamaica, Saint Domingue, and eventually Cuba followed close behind. Colonizers first attempted to use indigenous labor, but indigenous populations were devastated by disease, warfare, and coercion. It's important to be precise here. Sugar did not single-handedly cause the transatlantic slave trade. But sugar was one of the most significant economic forces driving the demand for enslaved African labor in the Atlantic world. The labor itself was brutal by design. Enslaved men, women, and children planted and cut cane under extreme physical strain. Mortality rates were devastatingly high, driven by overwork, accidents, malnutrition, and disease environments made worse by the tropical climate. And yet, this was never a story of passive suffering. Resistance was constant. Sabotage, flight, maroon communities, and rebellion, all integral parts of plantation history. The wealth generated by this machine didn't stay on the plantations. It moved through what's often called the triangular trade. Merchants, insurers, bankers, and entire port cities built their fortunes on this system. Sugar's profits reached into nearly every layer of European commercial life. This was not a side industry. It was one of the central economic engines of an entire era. In 1807, the British transatlantic slave trade was formally abolished. It's tempting to think of this as the ending. It wasn't. Slavery itself continued in many places for decades after the trade was abolished. And in Cuba, something even more unsettling happened. Sugar production expanded dramatically through the 19th century in what historians call the Second Slavery, a system that adapted and grew even as legal and political pressure mounted against it. The lesson here is uncomfortable but important. Ending a trade on paper did not immediately end coercion in practice. The system that had built sugar's global rise didn't simply disappear. It changed shape. So what finally made sugar the everyday substance we know today? Tea, coffee, and chocolate. As these drinks spread through European society, sugar transformed from an occasional luxury into a daily necessity. Then, in the 19th century, beet sugar emerged in Europe, breaking cane's monopoly on production. Combined with industrial refining, prices fell sharply. For the first time, sugar became genuinely affordable, not just for nobility but for ordinary households. Sugar's democratization was real. But it's worth remembering that democratization was built on top of centuries of a system rooted in forced human labor. Here's where the story lands. The sugar in your kitchen today, cheap, abundant, barely worth a second thought, carries an inheritance stretching back 6,000 years. Modern diets, modern industries, even modern public health challenges, all of it traces back through this same chain. The next time you stir sugar into your coffee, you're not just adding sweetness. You're touching the end of a very long, very human story. One that deserves to be remembered honestly, not just tasted. History has a way of hiding its greatest surprises in the most ordinary places, and there are countless more waiting to be uncovered. If this journey sparked your curiosity, consider leaving a like, sharing this story with someone who loves history or food, and telling us in the comments which culinary mystery we should explore next. And if you'd like to travel deeper into the forgotten history behind the foods we eat every day, we'd be honored to have you subscribe and join us for the next chapter. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next story.